Welcome to our show, Women to Women. It's nice to have you with us again. I'm Carol Paz, your hostess for the shows, and as usual, we have a very special person with us, and you're going to meet her in just a few moments. But first, I'd like to encourage you to write us, email us, like us on Facebook. There are many ways to get in communication with us, and we appreciate your questions, we appreciate your thoughts, and we'll respond to you in a very special way, either on the show or in person from Carol. So we have Lisa Davis tonight, and Lisa's going to be with us to share, and you can see she has a uniform on, which means there's got to be some kind of law enforcement involved with Lisa. But we want to thank our sponsors, Carpenter Nevada LLC, importer of fine Portuguese olive oil, international teas, and balsamic vinegar, as well as Villa Bass Deli and Cafe, home of Pete's famous and delicious Basque chorizo. So let's join Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. And this is really your second guest appearance on our show. You were part of our panel discussion group, and it's just nice to have you back as a single individual so we can get to know you as a person and what you do. So Lisa, long before you wore this uniform, you were a little girl. Where were you growing up as a child?
I grew up in New Mexico.
A Westerner by birth.
Yes, and I grew up in a little town called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico.
Honest to goodness,
Honest,
truth or consequences?
Truth or Consequences, yes, yes.
I've never heard of that.
It was formerly Hot Springs, New Mexico,
Okay.
and the Ralph Edwards show.
Yes. The old
This was
Ralph
actually
Edwards show.
before I was born that they drew the name of a town and came up with Hot Springs, New Mexico, and the townspeople voted and changed the name of the town.
And for those listeners and viewers out there who aren't familiar with Ralph Edwards, I mean, it was a famous show.
Yes.
This Is Your Life.
Yes, he would do one a year in Truth or Consequences. Every year he had a fiesta. And
Okay, so you're famous even before this show. All right, Lisa, so as a child growing up, were you one of several children, or are you an only child?
Okay, now I have a very diverse background.
Good.
My parents divorced before it was an acceptable thing to do.
Okay.
And they both remarried. So I'm the oldest of 10 children altogether, and we were all raised in the same hometown.
Oh my word, the eldest of 10.
Yes.
What a responsibility was put upon you, no?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, you range in age from where to where?
From about, well, I'm 54.
Okay.
And my youngest brother is, I want to say, 35.
All right.
Yes.
So what a wealth of experience you have just in communicating with family members, with relationships within that family as friends and sometimes sisters, sometimes with brothers, sister, all kinds
Yes.
of possibilities to communicate. So how long, well, let me ask you this. When did you come out of New Mexico and into the Carson City area?
Well, that's kind of a story. My husband accepted a position in Elko, Nevada.
Yes.
So he moved me from New Mexico. We were living on the Navajo reservation at the time, and he felt like it was better for myself, and we have 3 children, and so we moved. It was time to leave, and he accepted a position as a teacher in Elko, Nevada, which was culture shock for me because I had never been around snow.
Yes, but hopefully delightfully so. Okay, so is your husband Native American?
No, I am.
You are? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
What percent of you is Native American, and which tribe?
I am a quarter Choctaw.
Choctaw?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now what does that mean to the rest of us who are perhaps not Westerners by birth, I'm not, and who maybe don't understand the importance of tribal custom in your life?
For me, I was not raised with the tribal customs, although I became very acquainted with them when we lived on the Navajo reservation. I think more about it from the terms of learning style.
How do you mean?
Native American children and the culture works in a circle. Things come in full circle. And I didn't realize it until we moved out to the reservation that I learned in a full circle. I can learn something, and then it's going to go through that left brain. It's going to come back through that right brain, and then it's going to come into a circle. And my whole life, even coming to work for the sheriff's office, has been a full circle because my stepdad was a sheriff.
Oh.
Okay, so
You're
even
very
my life.
comfortable in your shoes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, Lisa, all right, changing states and experiencing different weather, conditions, environments, etc. Is New Mexico a lot different than Nevada when it comes to background or history? Was it difficult to move from one state to another and not give up or miss what you were born into?
Yes. New Mexico has a lot more culture. Okay. Nevada has culture, but there's subtle things where people divide a little bit more here. In New Mexico, it was nothing for us to have a big event and have, Hispanics, out of respect for people in my family who would prefer to be called Hispanic. That's their term.
Yes.
Although that's not the political term. It was nothing for us to have Native American, Hispanics, and other ethnicities into one group, and we did not have to do special invitations. We all came together. It was a melting pot. And I think I bring that to Nevada because when we do special events and activities for the sheriff's office, I don't do the things that some people think we should be doing.
Right.
And I have a tremendous success as a result.
Well, that's interesting because being, so to speak, the newcomer, the immigrant, to
Yes.
Nevada, you brought with you a sense of harmony. You brought with you a sense of communication and community as a group.
Yes.
And I think that's such a positive to have. And it's a reflection perhaps upon that 1/4 Choctaw that you are as well. That's neat. That's really neat. Now, have you always had a passion for police work?
Yes. It's kind of goes back to the diverse background.
Okay.
My stepdad, who actually raised me, so I call him my dad, was the sheriff, and didn't have enough help around the sheriff's office because it was a small town, and they didn't have money. So we worked in there, and I was...
As volunteers, but actually it's a real thing.
We were doing the real work without a paycheck because that would have been nepotism,
Right.
But it got in my blood, and I was the one of his children that caused him the most concern. He could have us working on out on the farm, and I could work all day in the sun and then come in, shower, and be ready to go again. And he thought I was going to be in trouble. And I did put a lot of gray hair on their heads. But
Okay, now during this time back
Yes.
in New Mexico, when you're helping out in the sheriff's office.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Did anything ever scare you? Did anything ever scary happen that made you stop and think, I don't want any part of this anymore?
It didn't frighten me away, but we had quite a few things actually happen because my dad worked very large cases. In this
What's
little
a
tiny
large
town,
case mean?
a large case, big drug dealers.
Okay.
Okay, one time he had a Minuteman case where they dealt with stolen firearms, and we're talking caves full of them. Because caves full of them. New Mexico has a lot of open space and what have you. We had airplanes that would come in with loads of drugs, things like that. And if you got too close to those drug dealers, they wanted to do things to retaliate and what have you.
So there was an element of violence.
Yes,
that area.
ma'am. See, Truth or Consequences, the location is 90 miles from El Paso or Juarez, Mexico, and 150 miles to Albuquerque. So it was the perfect drop-off point for drug dealers. And when I talk about drug deals, I'm talking about 100 kilos, 200 kilos coming in at a time when there would be a bust. So,
Okay. This is kind of mind-blowing, okay, for those of us who do police work. One of my questions is this. To become an officer of the law in any capacity, but I'm thinking because you have familiarity with drug dealers, drug pushers, drugs in general. Is there a certain personality type or mentality that you have to recognize that, all right, this woman or this man would make a fine officer because of? What does it take to work in that field where you are now? Not just right now, we're going to get to that in a little bit, but to even think about law enforcement. Not everybody can do that. Why not?
Well, some people shirk away from the danger, that's true, but some people don't have the people skills.
Such as?
In law enforcement, you need to be able to deal with people as they are. You can't, You're not always going to be able to bring them to your level. You're going to have to meet them where they are and then help them up. And from that standpoint, you need someone that is not too heavy-handed, but can be if they need to be. A sense of balance of power. I've met people that I felt like were inappropriate for law enforcement because I felt like they were, they didn't know how to use authority. And so I watched that very closely personally because I do come from New Mexico where you could see that abuse of power and authority.
And I'm an outsider, just an observer here, but sometimes I feel as if the respect, I have great respect for law and order because I like to function within that framework. And if I step out of, if I get a speeding ticket, I've stepped out of that frame of law and order, okay? And there are consequences. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. Any of us need to be careful, but especially police officers, with the power that comes with that authority.
There's a tremendous responsibility. And I took my first role modeling and my first lessons from my stepdad. He spoke Spanish fluently. He was a gringo, I mean, a white guy. And he could stand and make a speech, and Hispanic people would laugh.
Do you speak Spanish fluently?
No, I do not, but I do speak some. And I tell the kids in the classroom, do not cuss around me. I will recognize it. He taught me to read the Constitution, to know my law. I grew up reading the Constitution, and so when people misquote it, I catch that.
Good for you. Good for you. That should
Not
be a
every
fundamental reading.
Well, I think it is.
Yes.
And I grew up, my mother, well, I need to include this too. My mother was a county treasurer and a county assessor from the time I was 6 till I was about 10 years old.
All right.
So I grew up in politics. My mother was she was the president of a political women's club.
Okay.
I will leave the party nameless
All right.
there. Okay. But she was the president of that from the time I was 6 till I got my first job out of college. You see, I've got my Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice, but they pushed education very hard, and they were actually hoping I'd be a teacher instead. But
You are. You're both.
well, I am now, but at the time I wanted to go thump heads and bust the bad guy.
Okay, we're going to come back to that, Lisa, okay, because I know what you're doing now is really a combination of all of your skills. So when we return with Lisa, we're going to learn some more under the uniform knowledge that we need to know, okay, in terms of law enforcement. And what is it that our kids today are learning from Lisa Davis in the classroom? Don't go away. Be right back.
Pets of the Homeless is a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization that provides pet food and veterinary care to the homeless and less fortunate in local communities.
With donations from the public, we're able to provide homeless shelters with crates, bowls, cleaning materials, so that homeless with pets can come into homeless shelters and get the services that they need to get out of homelessness.
Report of wildland fires threatening structures.
When disaster strikes, will you be ready? Information is essential during a disaster. That's why we use the latest technology to keep you informed. When you register, you'll receive emergency alert messages on all your devices and phone numbers at once. Go to ReadyWashoe.com. Click on the Get Message icon, then just fill out this quick form. It's easy. Don't get caught unprepared. When disaster strikes, Be ready.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second portion of Women to Women. Again, I'm Carol Paz, your hostess, with Lisa Davis, who is sharing that she has had pretty much all of her life this real love for police work, and now that she's here in Carson, out of New Mexico and into Nevada, this uniform stands for what that you wear today, Lisa? What all is, I know that you do so many different things here in the community in Carson City, but wearing this uniform is representative of what that you do?
Well, first of all, it represents the law and our sheriff, who is an elected official. To me, it was very important if I was going back into law enforcement to work for an elected official, because the office of sheriff is the only office that was mentioned in the original Constitution. And that was drilled into me by my dad.
Okay.
And this opportunity for me was a chance to serve a community and still be true to my roots.
Okay. So Lisa, in serving Carson City, where is most of your time spent? Doing what with the community?
Oh my goodness. It's actually divided between the classroom, and then it's also in organizing special events and some of the community services that the sheriff's office provides.
All right, so let's divide it down. Let's cut it in half. And your service in the classroom is promoted in what way?
Primarily the DARE curriculum.
Okay.
And
DARE.
Yes, Drug Abuse Resistance Education.
Okay.
And this year we are promoting the Keeping It Real form of DARE, and it is an approved program that is brand new, out of the fresh on the market, redeveloped by Penn State University.
Okay, and I have a question, because as a teacher in New York State, the DARE program was there with me in my 5th grade classrooms from late 70s and into the 80s. So when you say this is a new approach, this is a new program, what do you mean?
Well, we're still focusing on some drug facts, but we have expanded to talk about bullying, to talk about
other issues
drugs and
besides
alcohol, but also to talk about coping skills. Stress and communications are a big part of this curriculum, as well as decision making. We have to practice on making good decisions every class.
Now, are you primarily in the 5th grades, or do you work in the upper levels as well?
Right now, the 5th grades, we are working on a plan to take the program to the 7th grade, and I do have a curriculum for that as well.
Okay, 5th graders are pretty bright kids. I mean, they have all, in my opinion, they haven't really, they're still in elementary, and they haven't really entered that zone, of the middle school, where sometimes it's very confusion. There's a lot of confusion, frustration, and hormonally they're at all different stages of the game. And certainly at high school, they've already picked and selected a lot of their friends that are going to make big differences in their lives. So at the 5th grade level, what are you hearing kids relate to you in terms of the drug scene, or in terms of how to make good decisions? For some of them, they've never had to think about that at all.
Oh my goodness, today in the classroom, just today, I was kind of shocked. I had to stop it. I had a young lady describe a pot pipe and a bong type of thing, and how kids were using that. And she said, "Is this how you use?" And I don't teach kids how to use drugs. And so I had to stop the entire thing. And she tried to push that, but they talk about what they're seeing with their older brothers and sisters.
Sure.
Or people in their neighborhoods.
Right.
Things like that. They also talk about crime. They talk about their bikes being stolen, or the graffiti that they've seen, or it could be a violent offense that occurred down the street from them, or things like that. Yes.
So the drug scene is pretty much a part, it's a commonality that kids, they're aware that it's out there. It may not be in their own home, hopefully it's not. It may not even be in their neighborhood, but it could be, very likely could be. So do they have a natural fear of trying the unknown, or do you think as 5th graders, are you making headway with a knowledge of what drugs can do in your life and become in your life, are they open to learning?
Yes, they are. And I will add to that the new information about what tobacco, alcohol, marijuana do to the brain. Kids are fascinated when they see the pictures of the brain and things like that. They're very, very interested. There seems to be a disconnect, like you've mentioned, when the kids go into the middle school. And that's one of the reasons the sheriff is looking very strongly at trying to get programs and law enforcement officers to work a little closer with our middle school students because of that disconnect. And it is hormonally caused. It's caused by all kinds of things, many changes. Kids go from an elementary school where they're secure to
Strong framework around
yes, and then you go to the middle school where
more
there's
choices, less
more
framework.
choices. There's more responsibility, but
Yes.
sometimes they're not ready for that responsibility. So we.
How do the students look upon you? Do they trust you?
Some do and some don't.
Why do you suppose that is?
Sometimes it's based on their relationships with law enforcement or past experiences. Sometimes it is because I've corrected them in the classroom. Some students get upset and they think I remember that forever, which I don't. But the relationship we have with our youth is very important. So I work very hard to try to form a positive relationship with most of them. And I think that we have a very good one.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yes.
Lisa, how much have things changed when you were a kid and with fifth graders that you're working with today in terms of awareness of dangers that can come in their lives, not only with drugs, but how knowledgeable are kids? How naive are kids? Would you ever have thought that you would be working in the classroom dealing with the issues that you do?
No, it never occurred to me. Our world has changed, and we've had to change and evolve with it in order to protect our children and help them to learn. There's been a huge emphasis on the group and not on personal responsibility. And yet substance abuse is one of those things that you have to take personal responsibility for.
Okay, help us understand that.
Okay, it's like I tell the children in the classroom. Addiction is the one disease that comes with a choice. It came with a choice. The person started to use to begin with, and they had to decide to do that. Okay? If you get in trouble with the law for, let's say, stealing a candy bar, did the problem start with the candy bar? No. It started with the thoughts and the choice to steal. The thoughts and the choice to use drugs are the same thing. And that's what I emphasize to our youth, because if they're with their friends and they're the ones caught with that stolen candy bar, they're the ones going to go to court. You know, so it does come down to personal responsibility. And I'm a firm believer in that.
Now, you said formally that you have 3 children of your own?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How do they respond to their mom being a cop? Is it hard on them in any way, do you think?
Not now, because they're adults. But I was an adult probation and parole officer in New Mexico, and a juvenile probation officer up in Elko. So I had to go through the police academy and the whole thing, and that was kind of hard on them because they were watching me learn to run. I was born with asthma. I didn't know how to run, and so. But the authority, it really had an impact on my daughter, because she wanted to make friends with people she couldn't hang out with that on the surface looked fine. And yet I had them on probation, or somebody else did, and they were not so fine. And so we had to draw some boundaries and things. Now my kids are grateful for those experiences.
Okay, because they have a different perspective entirely as an adult than they did as a kid.
Yes.
How do you get through to kids that they're not always going to think like they do as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old? That be patient, wait. Don't rush your thinking process and make such a decision that it could affect the rest of your life in a detrimental way. I'm thinking of a specific example. In our family, we have a really wonderful kid who got very early on, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, into things he shouldn't be. Part of that was drugs. And as a man today, that struggle has never gone away. And it has diminished greatly his ability to stabilize a job, to stabilize with relationships. And if he could repeat his life, if he could, which he can't, the decisions that he made back very early on are still with him. There was no way out. It's been a repeated time in rehab centers. And sometimes they last longer than others. So I'm just wondering, with your experience and with your own children, how you get through to kids, can you get through to kids, as to what early on decisions can mean for the rest of their life?
Oh, you know, if you talk to the kids, I don't have to get through to them.
Ooh.
The reality is many of them had those same experiences. And they've made those observations. What I work on is to emphasize that they don't have to go on to make those same choices.
Okay.
A lot of kids have been told, if you grew up in an alcoholic home, you'll probably be an alcoholic yourself.
That's self-defeating right there.
Yes, it is. And yet, if people looked at the resilient child training, and where people have overcome tremendous obstacles and adversities in their lives, they went on to live healthy, productive lives. The resilient people did. And so I focus on, yes, this is happening, but you don't have to go on to repeat that mistake.
Right, right. There is absolute hope there. Before we finish up our program tonight, there are women out there who are listening who have a possibility of saying, okay, what Lisa's saying, I'd like to think about that for my life. What time do you need to think about becoming a police officer?
What time? Personally, I think an education is very important.
First of
so
all.
I would strongly encourage people to go to college.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to be a police officer when you're 18 because you can't go into the bars, okay, and things. So you take the time to go into college and to get an education, because that may not be what you want. I always tell people, have a plan B. What happens if something happens? Then you can fall back on another trade and what have you. So that's one thing. In their early 20s
okay.
is a good time. I went to the police academy when I was in my mid 30s, and that was it was a very big challenge. I had never run in my life.
There's a lot of physicalness, isn't there?
There is. I do my push-ups to this day.
Okay.
But
so staying fit is very important.
Yes, it is, and you have to.
I wouldn't mess with you.
You have to be ready to mentally to stay sharp on certain things, and it depends on what your job assignment is once you enter law enforcement, as to what skills you're going to hone. And every once in a while you have to revisit the other to keep it kind of current.
Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought, so we thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we hope to see you again. Okay, such a lot of practical side views that you have to life that most of us don't get an opportunity to be a part of, and it's good, it's refreshing to know that you're out there in the community and with the kids in school. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Okay, so we thank you so much for joining us tonight, and remember, like us on Facebook. Don't hesitate to write us with your comments on our email, and until we see you next week, have a good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.